In the quiet town of Carlisle, Iowa, Kenny and Bobby Mackay were like many young couples, dreaming of building a family together. But their journey to parenthood was not easy. Struggling with infertility, they faced months of emotional setbacks and uncertainty. Bobby had been born with a pituitary gland disorder that caused fertility issues, and despite their longing for children, it seemed like their dream might never become a reality. They had already welcomed one daughter, Michaela, with the help of fertility treatments, and although they were grateful, they hoped to give her a sibling. After thoughtful discussions and with cautious optimism, the couple decided to try fertility treatments again. This time, they turned to a medication called Metrodin, which stimulated ovulation. What followed, however, was beyond anyone's expectations. When Bobby went in for a routine ultrasound early in the pregnancy, the technician froze. Then, with wide eyes, they looked at the screen again. Not one, not two, but 7 embryos appeared on the monitor. Bobby and Kenny sat in stunned silence as the doctor confirmed the impossible: Bobby was pregnant with septuplets. The odds were astronomical, the risks enormous. The doctors presented the Mackays with a grim reality: carrying 7 babies to term would be a tremendous risk to both the mother and the children. The chances of miscarriage, premature birth, and health complications were high. The couple was informed about the option of selective reduction, a procedure where some embryos are terminated to improve the survival chances of the others. But for Bobby and Kenny, the choice was clear. Deeply rooted in their faith and guided by a belief in the sanctity of life, they decided they would not choose which of their children would live or die. They would leave the outcome in God's hands and prepare for whatever came next. Their decision sparked both praise and criticism from around the country. The media picked up the story quickly, turning their quiet life upside down. Headlines shouted about the miracle pregnancy, and news crews lined up outside their modest home. Bobby, meanwhile, focused on doing everything she could to carry the pregnancy safely, eating, resting, and working closely with her doctors. As the months went by, her body stretched to an unimaginable degree. Each week brought new challenges and growing concern. But despite the odds, Bobby kept going. Her strength amazed doctors, and her determination became a symbol of hope to many. The countdown had begun to a birth that would soon become history. On the morning of November 19, 1997, Methodist Hospital in Des Moines, Iowa, was anything but ordinary. Inside the maternity wing, a medical team of over 40 specialists stood ready, prepared for one of the most complex and high-risk deliveries in modern medical history. The world was watching. Bobby Mackay, now more than 30 weeks pregnant, had reached a critical moment, one that many doctors had feared she might never make it to. Her belly stretched far beyond the norm, and she could barely move without help. The babies were running out of space, and it was time. At exactly 12:45 p.m., the first cry pierced the air. One by one, in a rapid yet highly coordinated C-section procedure, the Mackay septuplets entered the world. Kenneth Robert, the firstborn, was followed by Alexis May, Natalie Sue, Kelsey Ann, Nathan Roy, Brandon James, and finally, Joel Stephen. Within just 6 minutes, 7 babies, 4 boys and 3 girls, were born. Each weighed between 2 and 4 pounds, fragile and tiny, but miraculously, alive. The medical team worked quickly, passing each newborn to waiting neonatal specialists who hustled them to incubators. The room buzzed with urgency and hope. The babies were immediately placed in the NICU, their tiny bodies wired to breathing tubes and monitors. Despite being premature and vulnerable, each of them showed a fighting spirit. Their heartbeats, though faint, were strong enough to give doctors confidence. Against nearly impossible odds, all 7 had survived birth. News of the historic delivery spread like wildfire. By the evening, major news networks had picked up the story. World's first surviving septuplets born in Iowa flashed across TV screens. Crowds gathered outside the hospital. Reporters called non-stop. The Mackay family was suddenly thrust into international fame. Offers of help, donations, and gifts poured in from around the world: diapers, formula, clothing, even a specially designed van for transporting all 8 children, including their oldest daughter Michaela. Yet, behind the joy and media frenzy, reality set in quickly. Raising one preemie baby is a challenge. Raising 7, each with medical needs, was a task almost no one could fathom. Bobby and Kenny were overwhelmed, still recovering from the surreal events of the day. They had gone from parents of 1 to a family of 10 in less than a week. For the doctors and nurses, it was a medical triumph. For the Mackays, it was the beginning of a new, exhausting, and miraculous chapter. And for the world, it was a story of hope, faith, and the incredible strength of a determined mother and father. As the Mackay septuplets stabilized in the NICU and the world celebrated their unprecedented survival, life back home began to transform in ways the family could have never anticipated. Almost overnight, their story became a global phenomenon. The phones in their modest home in Carlisle rang constantly with calls from journalists, well-wishers, and curious strangers. News trucks lined the streets. People drove from neighboring towns just to glimpse the house where 7 tiny miracles would soon live. But amidst the media circus, a wave of generosity also began pouring in: gifts, donations, and offers of help that left the Mackays in awe. Major companies stepped forward to lend a hand. A generous donation of a 5,000 square foot house was offered, equipped with 7 cribs, a walk-in pantry, and a laundry room large enough to serve a small hotel. A local car dealership provided a 15-passenger van to accommodate the rapidly expanding family. Procter & Gamble donated a lifetime supply of diapers. Other companies supplied formula, baby clothes, and household necessities. The support was overwhelming, and for a young family facing one of the most demanding parenting challenges imaginable, it was a lifeline. Despite the public attention and generosity, the Mackays remained grounded. Kenny continued working his factory job as long as he could, while Bobby devoted herself fully to caring for the children. Their Christian faith played a central role in their perspective, helping them stay focused on gratitude rather than fear. They often emphasized that while they were grateful for the help, they wanted to rely on hard work and responsibility as much as possible. Behind closed doors, however, reality was setting in. The day-to-day logistics of caring for 7 infants were staggering. Feeding schedules were planned with military precision. Each baby needed to be fed, changed, bathed, and comforted every few hours. Bottles had to be sterilized, diapers changed nearly 50 times a day, and laundry ran around the clock. Even with help from volunteers and extended family, the work never stopped. Sleep was rare and often fragmented. The Mackays developed a strict routine to manage the chaos, relying on color-coded systems and detailed charts to keep track of who needed what and when. Adding to the challenge was the couple's desire to give each child a sense of individual identity. They refused to treat them as a collective group but rather as 7 unique souls, each deserving of attention, love, and space to grow. This commitment meant constantly rotating caregivers, engaging each baby in one-on-one play, and resisting the temptation to group raise them. Their eldest daughter, Michaela, only a toddler herself at the time, suddenly became the big sister to 7 siblings. Though still very young, she quickly adapted to her new role with remarkable maturity. The Mackays made a conscious effort to ensure she didn't feel overshadowed by the spotlight now shining on the septuplets. They often referred to her as the family's first miracle. While the rest of the world marveled at the numbers, 7 babies, 1 house, countless diapers, the Mackays focused on the intangibles, the quiet moments of holding a sleeping child, the bond between siblings, the warmth of strangers turned friends. Fame might have found them, but inside their home, it was never about the headlines. It was about family, love, and getting through one day at a time. As the months passed and the babies grew stronger, the Mackay household settled into a kind of organized chaos that only they could understand. Every room echoed with baby giggles, cries, and the constant hum of activity. What had once been an ordinary home had transformed into a carefully choreographed operation, a place where feeding, bathing, sleeping, and playtime ran on precise schedules to keep the household from spiraling into overwhelming disorder. Yet, amid the busyness, there were unforgettable moments, a first laugh here, a shaky first step there. Each milestone was not only cherished but multiplied by 7, making even the smallest accomplishments feel monumental. Bobby and Kenny took turns being caregivers, teachers, nurses, and cheerleaders. From the outside, it may have looked impossible, but to them, every smile, every coo, every sleepy cuddle made the exhaustion worthwhile. Days often started before sunrise. Bottles were prepared in assembly line fashion, sometimes by the dozen. Meals were a synchronized event, 7 high chairs, 7 bibs, and often 7 different reactions to the same spoonful of mashed peas. Bath time required a rotating strategy, with plastic tubs lined up like a miniature car wash. Sleep was rarely uninterrupted, and alone time was something of a myth. Yet somehow, through the fatigue, they laughed. They found joy in the small moments, knowing how precious and fleeting this chapter would be. As the septuplets reached toddlerhood, the household entered a new phase. With mobility came more chaos. Now there were 7 sets of little legs eager to explore, climb, and get into everything. Baby gates went up in every doorway. Locks were installed on cabinets, drawers, and even the refrigerator. Each child had their own emerging personality. One was a born leader, another a quiet observer, another full of mischief. Bobby and Kenny took great care to nurture these differences, refusing to let any of their children feel like just one of the 7. The outside world remained fascinated. Journalists continued to check in, and the family occasionally appeared in interviews or special TV features. But the Mackays were cautious not to let fame define their lives. They turned down offers for reality shows and stayed grounded in their values. They believed their children deserved a private, normal upbringing as much as possible, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their birth. Community support remained strong. Volunteers helped with childcare, housework, and grocery runs. Neighbors brought meals. Churches organized donation drives. Despite the spectacle of it all, people rallied around the Mackays not as a media story, but as a real family doing their best. And the family, in turn, was always generous with their gratitude, never taking the kindness for granted. Michaela, the septuplets' older sister, adjusted to life in a full house with surprising grace. Though she had to share her parents more than most children do, Bobby and Kenny were intentional about carving out time just for her, reading stories, taking her on solo outings, reminding her that she, too, was special. It was their way of maintaining balance, of showing that love didn't divide, it multiplied. Through the whirlwind of raising 8 young children, what held everything together was love, routine, and an unwavering sense of purpose. The Mackays knew they were living a once-in-a-lifetime story, but they approached each day with the same simple goal: to raise kind, strong, healthy individuals, one diaper, one bottle, one bedtime story at a time. As the Mackay septuplets moved beyond their toddler years and into childhood, their household transformed once again, but this time into a busy, buzzing ecosystem of 7 unique personalities growing at once. Their early school years brought with them a whole new world of activity and structure, and while the outside world still saw them as a set inside their home, they were growing into distinct individuals. Each child developed their own interests, quirks, and talents, and Bobby and Kenny made it a top priority to nurture them as such. The family never used terms like the group or the pack. Instead, they called them by name, celebrated their individuality, and tailored their parenting to each child's needs. The dining room table became a place of noisy dinners, messy art projects, and spelling tests. Homework time was often a feat of logistics, with each child needing attention for different subjects. Bobby became a master at juggling multiple math problems and reading assignments simultaneously, while Kenny helped with science projects or fixing broken toys. The once quiet house now echoed with music, laughter, shouting matches over board games, and the occasional emotional meltdown. But through it all, the home pulsed with life and love. Their different personalities became more obvious with each passing year. One child was naturally artistic and loved to draw, another was analytical and obsessed with building things. A few gravitated toward sports, and one had a knack for music. Some were outgoing and social, while others were more introverted and thoughtful. The challenge for the Mackays wasn't just managing the logistics of raising 7 same-aged children, it was giving each one space to thrive as themselves. School life brought its own complexity. Though the septuplets were often placed in the same grade, the family worked closely with teachers to ensure they weren't constantly compared to one another. The kids were even placed in different classrooms when possible, to encourage independence and reduce the pressure of always being one of the 7. School events, field trips, and parent-teacher conferences were never simple. Every schedule had to be coordinated down to the minute. Still, the Mackays attended every recital, every game, and every school event they possibly could, determined to support their children equally. Discipline in such a large family required fairness, consistency, and a good sense of humor. Kenny and Bobby were firm but loving, teaching their children respect, patience, and the importance of working together. They believed in giving their kids responsibility from a young age. Chores were assigned and rotated. Some kids washed dishes, others helped with laundry or cleaned the playroom. Learning to work as a team became an important part of their upbringing. Despite the workload and the constant demands of a full house, there were plenty of joyful moments. Holidays were magical. Christmas mornings with 7 little ones rushing down the stairs in matching pajamas, birthdays that turned into festivals of balloons and cake, and summer afternoons filled with sprinklers, laughter, and the chaos of backyard games. These were the moments that Bobby and Kenny held onto, the ones that reminded them why every hard day was worth it. Media attention never completely faded, but the family had learned to manage it. They did occasional check-ins with the public but always maintained boundaries. As their children became more aware of their fame, Bobby and Kenny guided them with humility, reminding them that what made them special wasn't being septuplets, it was who they were becoming as individuals. By their preteen years, the Mackay septuplets were no longer just a miracle story. They were 7 young people carving their own paths, supported by a family that had chosen love, faith, and perseverance over ease. And though their home was never quiet, it was always full of noise, of energy, and of a deeply rooted sense of togetherness. As the septuplets grew into their teenage years, the Mackay home shifted again, this time into a house full of independent minds, strong opinions, and the unmistakable energy that comes with adolescence. What had once been the chaos of diapers and playtime was now replaced with busy schedules, social lives, and a surprising amount of noise from the never-ending hum of electronics, music, and conversations spilling from 7 different directions. Each child was becoming a young adult, eager to explore the world and define who they were outside the shadow of being part of a famous group of siblings. With 7 teenagers under one roof, Bobby and Kenny faced perhaps the most challenging phase of parenting yet. The days of managing feeding times had been replaced with navigating school dances, teenage angst, and the looming question of the future. There were debates about curfews, struggles over phones and privileges, and plenty of moments where opinions clashed and emotions ran high. Yet through all the growing pains, the Mackays remained united as a family. They emphasized communication, mutual respect, and maintaining the sense of support that had always defined their home. What stood out most during this period was how distinct each child had become. They pursued different activities in school. Some gravitated toward athletics, others joined clubs, and a few became deeply interested in music or technology. Their academic interests varied widely as well. One child loved science and dreamed of becoming a doctor, while another excelled in literature and wanted to write. There were students who needed more academic support and others who breezed through schoolwork. The family's earlier commitment to treating them as individuals began to pay off in powerful ways. No longer simply the septuplets, they were each carving out their own identity. The transition into high school also brought challenges unique to their situation. At school, teachers, classmates, and even strangers still referred to them collectively. Some of the kids embraced the attention, while others found it exhausting. Bobby and Kenny worked hard to make sure their children didn't feel trapped by their shared identity. They encouraged personal goals and private achievements. They supported individual friendships, hobbies, and paths, even when those paths led far from the others. Daily life was still incredibly busy. With 7 teens involved in various extracurriculars, Kenny often found himself behind the wheel of the family van, driving from one practice or meeting to another. Bobby kept calendars updated with precision, tracking who needed to be where and when. Dinner was often staggered, but they always made an effort to sit down together as a family at least a few times a week, holding onto a tradition that grounded them amid the whirlwind of teenage life. Financially, this period was particularly stressful. With 7 children preparing for college or careers, the expenses grew rapidly. The free diapers and formula of the past were long gone, and now there were tuition applications, standardized test fees, and dreams that came with price tags. Still, Bobby and Kenny stayed focused on their values. They taught their kids the importance of hard work, encouraging part-time jobs and saving money. They didn't promise to pay for everything but made it clear they would support their children in every way they could. Perhaps most striking during this time was the deep bond the siblings had developed. Despite their differences, the septuplets had a connection that few others could understand. They had shared every moment of life, birthdays, first days of school, heartbreaks, and victories, and that foundation created a quiet loyalty between them. Of course, there were fights, rivalries, and periods of distance, but at their core, they remained a unit, rooted in a shared history unlike any other. As graduation loomed on the horizon, the Mackays stood at the threshold of the next big transition. The miracle babies the world had watched grow up were now nearly adults, preparing to step out into the world as individuals. And though it meant the family home would soon feel a little emptier, Bobby and Kenny knew that they had given their children the greatest gift of all. Not just life, but the tools to live it fully, as their own person, with the love of a family always behind them. The day the Mackay septuplets graduated from high school was one that felt surreal not only for their family but for the entire community. What had once seemed like an impossible future, 7 premature babies born on the same day, fighting for survival, had arrived in the form of cap and gown-clad teenagers stepping confidently into adulthood. The auditorium was packed with friends, family, teachers, neighbors, and even media who had followed their journey for nearly 2 decades. As each name was called, the crowd erupted in applause, not just for academic achievement, but for the extraordinary milestone that marked the culmination of years of hard work, faith, and resilience. Bobby and Kenny sat in the front row, overcome with emotion. They could hardly believe how far their children had come. The sleepless nights, the challenges, the noise and clutter, it had all led to this moment. The children they once fed in high chairs side by side were now young men and women with distinct goals, dreams, and paths ahead. Some of the septuplets had chosen to attend college, others to pursue vocational training or enter the workforce. A few were still deciding what their futures would look like, but what mattered most to their parents was that they were all moving forward on their own terms. Each child had taken a different academic path. Natalie and Kelsey were drawn toward education and healthcare, inspired by the nurturing roles they had seen modeled in their own upbringing. Brandon showed interest in construction and hands-on work, while Joel leaned toward computer science. Alexis, despite facing physical challenges due to cerebral palsy, was determined to attend college and advocate for people with disabilities. Nathan, also born with cerebral palsy, had excelled in his studies and expressed interest in engineering. Kenny Jr., more reserved but deeply thoughtful, was still exploring his options. The diversity in their dreams reflected the care Bobby and Kenny had taken to nurture them as individuals. After the ceremony, the family hosted a celebration in their backyard, an event that drew family, friends, and supporters from near and far. The tables were decorated with photos from each child's life, their first steps, their school portraits, their achievements. A large banner hung from the porch, "Congratulations Septuplets, Class of 2016. There was food, laughter, and tears. It was a day not just of looking forward, but of reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them here. But as celebratory as the day was, it also came with bittersweet undertones. With adulthood came independence. The family dynamic would inevitably shift. For nearly 2 decades, the Mackay household had been full of constant motion, layered with responsibilities and routines. Now, the once crowded hallways would begin to quiet as each child stepped into the world. Bobby and Kenny prepared themselves for a new kind of life, one not dominated by feeding schedules and school pickups, but by phone calls, college visits, and occasional weekend reunions. Even in the excitement, Bobby admitted to moments of fear. Would the world see her children the way she did? Would they be ready for the challenges of adulthood? But she trusted the foundation they had laid as parents, teaching their children responsibility, compassion, faith, and independence. They had raised them to think for themselves, to work hard, and to care for others. And that, she believed, would carry them further than anything else. The siblings, for their part, knew the gravity of the moment. They had always known their story was extraordinary, but now they were eager to write the next chapter, not as a group defined by novelty, but as individuals with the freedom to pursue their passions. Graduation wasn't the end of their journey, it was the beginning of 7 new ones. And though they would go in different directions, they carried with them the same starting point, a home built on love, faith, and the belief that with determination and unity, even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome. As adulthood unfolded, the Mackay septuplets began to chart their own unique courses in life, stepping into the world not as a group bound by their extraordinary birth, but as individuals with diverse dreams, personalities, and ambitions. The transition wasn't sudden, it had begun in high school and deepened through college, jobs, and relationships, but now it was unmistakably real. The house that once echoed with the collective energy of 8 children was quieter. Bobby and Kenny found themselves walking past empty bedrooms, now decorated in ways that reflected who had lived there but no longer held the presence of daily life. Some of the siblings chose to attend college locally, while others moved out of state. The adjustment was hard, especially for Bobby, who had been so immersed in the daily grind of raising 8 children that solitude felt foreign. Yet, there was pride in watching her children pursue their independence. Brandon joined the military and embraced a life of service and discipline. Alexis and Natalie, driven by compassion, pursued degrees in education and child development. Nathan and Joel, drawn to the sciences and technology, carved out futures in fields that would have seemed unimaginable on the day they were born prematurely. Kenny Jr., more reserved and reflective, explored career options at his own pace, seeking a path that resonated with his personality. Kelsey, with her empathetic nature, followed a nurturing path, working with children and families. The siblings still stayed close, though they now lived apart. Family reunions became treasured occasions, and holidays were a mixture of nostalgia and celebration. Around the dinner table, where once there had been chaos and high chairs, now sat grown adults swapping stories of work, college classes, romantic relationships, and personal growth. They teased each other like siblings always do, but the affection remained deep and sincere. Despite their many differences, they still shared an unbreakable bond, one forged in the rare experience of growing up as part of the world's first surviving septuplets. Media attention had long since faded, though the public remained quietly curious. Occasionally, articles would circulate online, "Where are the Mackay septuplets now?" But the family had successfully shifted the spotlight away from spectacle and toward privacy. Kenny and Bobby remained protective of their children's boundaries, allowing them to grow without the pressure of public scrutiny. Their story had inspired many, but they never wanted it to overshadow the children's personal identities. Bobby and Kenny, after decades of hands-on parenting, began exploring their own identities beyond mom and dad. They took time to reconnect as a couple, to travel, and to enjoy the slower rhythm of a quieter home. Yet, they always remained just a phone call away, ready to offer advice, encouragement, or simply a listening ear. Parenting, they realized, never really ends, it just changes form. Their journey as a family had been filled with challenges and triumphs, but at its core was always love and resilience. The years of uncertainty after the septuplets' birth had given way to years of purpose. Every sleepless night, every hard decision, every financial struggle had led to this: 7 adults making their way in the world with confidence, kindness, and the strength of a deeply rooted family foundation. Looking back, the Mackays never saw themselves as extraordinary. They were simply a family who had been handed an impossible situation and chose to meet it with faith, unity, and tireless commitment. Their story, once headline news, had evolved into something quieter but even more powerful: the successful launch of 7 new lives, each different, each remarkable, and each deeply loved.